Just last month, my friends and I had a terrifying experience. I'm a high school senior, and growing up in Nevada, there isn't a ton to do. So, my friends and I got into urban exploring, finding abandoned buildings, old tunnels, forgotten places. It was never about breaking things, it was just about the thrill of discovery. Charles, the quiet, mysterious guy in our group, was always the best at finding the weirdest spots. One day, Charles showed us a screenshot from a sketchy Instagram account. It had blurry photos and creepy comments. The caption mentioned dozens of abandoned mine shafts in the Mojave Desert. Charles had apparently been in contact with the account, and they'd given him some general areas to check. He was immediately obsessed. So, that Saturday, it was me, Charles, and our friend James. We took my Wrangler, perfect for off-road desert driving. We didn't have a specific address, just a general area deep in the Mojave. We turned off the main road, and the dirt path soon faded into nothing. We drove for what felt like forever, no signs, no structures, just endless desert. James was getting irritated, convinced Charles had been scammed. But Charles, stubborn as ever, insisted we keep looking. Just as we were about to give up, James pointed something out. At first, it looked like more rocks and sand, but as we got closer, we saw it, a half-collapsed wooden structure built into the side of a slope. A dark hole was visible behind some support beams. It was definitely a man-made mine shaft. Charles pulled out his phone, dropped a pin on his offline map, and simply told James, "Told you." We'd been driving in circles in the middle of nowhere, and somehow, we'd found one. I parked a few yards away, and we geared up. Charles even brought masks. The mine looked even sketchier up. The shaft sloped steeply downward, not a straight drop, but still a challenging descent. The ground was loose, and old wooden beams lined the walls, surprisingly sturdy. The deeper we went, the colder and quieter it became. The entrance light disappeared entirely. We eventually reached what felt like the bottom, where the shaft leveled out and opened into a wider tunnel with several branches. It was exactly as you'd imagine, old support beams, rusted rails, and a thick layer of dust. The air smelled stale, and I was grateful for the masks. We picked a tunnel and started walking, not saying much. There wasn't much to see, the place seemed to have been stripped of anything valuable. Then we heard it, a faint dragging sound from further down the tunnel. I thought I imagined it until I saw Charles had stopped too. James motioned for us to turn off our flashlights, and we plunged into total darkness, listening. The scraping sound came again, like metal or wood being dragged. It was hard to tell with the echo, but it was getting closer. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the scraping slowly getting louder, not too close, but still terrifying. Then, James accidentally flicked his flashlight on and off. I wanted to kill him. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then, a loud metallic clang from deep in the tunnel, like whatever was being dragged had been dropped. And right after that, the most awful, demonic scream I'd ever heard. It barely sounded human. We turned and ran, not caring how loud we were. I've never run faster. I could hear footsteps behind me and felt a panic attack rising. I tripped, my shoe came off, but I kept going, ignoring the pain. Charles and James were already climbing the incline. I practically threw myself up, half barefoot. The pain was excruciating, I kept getting splinters. Only adrenaline got me out of there. I couldn't drive, so James took the wheel. He floored it the moment I closed the door. We didn't know if we were followed, but we weren't sticking around to find out. We drove in silence to the nearest hospital. I needed a tetanus shot, and it took days before I could walk normally. A few days later, James realized he'd dropped his wallet near the shaft entrance. We decided to go back, just to the entrance, never inside. We found something, my shoe. It was a few feet from the mine, torn up, like something had bitten into it. There were literal teeth marks, and chunks were missing. We didn't stay long after that. We have no rational explanation. Some might say it was a homeless person, but how could they survive down there with no food? Charles tried to message that Instagram account about what happened, but he never got a response. It'll be a long time before I go urban exploring in the desert again. I've always been an outdoorsy guy. Camping and fishing trips are my kind of vacation. My girlfriend, Tiki, shares my love for nature, which is a big part of why we're together. A couple of weeks ago, we decided to try something different, camping in the desert for a few days. We'd done forests, mountains, and lakes, but never experienced the open, silent, dry isolation of the desert. We had to try it, especially for the stargazing. We love watching the stars and knew this spot was far from any light pollution. I found a remote, legal campsite online, no amenities, just open land, fire rings, and stars. Perfect. We packed the truck and drove 3 hours early on a Friday morning. The last hour was on a dirt road that seemed to go on forever, with no signs of human life. By late afternoon, we found the campsite, completely empty, just as I'd hoped. The first couple of nights were perfect, warm days, cool nights, clear skies. We'd sit by the fire, talk, or lie back and stare at the sky. It was so refreshing to be disconnected. Both nights, though, we heard something strange in the distance, a low, drawn-out sound, like a howl or a moan. It didn't sound human, more like an animal. The first night, we both paused, looked at each other, and laughed it off, assuming it was a coyote or mountain lion. The second night, the same sound, same time. We chalked it up to desert wildlife. It was unsettling, but we weren't going to let it ruin our trip. The third night, I woke up to footsteps outside the tent. Soft at first, faint crunches, like someone walking slowly over dry dirt. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't an animal, it was too steady and slow. I was frozen, heart pounding, every muscle locked up. The steps stopped a few feet away from the tent. A small orange glow appeared through the tent fabric, waist height, a few feet to the side. Whoever was out there held the flame steady for a few seconds, then waved it slowly. I didn't move, trying not to make a sound. Then the flame got bigger, much bigger, like they'd lit something, a torch, maybe. Without warning, the person dropped whatever they were holding. I heard a dull thump, and a second later, the side of the tent lit up. The heat came fast, and within seconds, the fire started spreading. That's what finally broke my paralysis. I woke Tiki, and she immediately understood. We scrambled, tossing our stuff out of the tent onto the dirt. I'm not even sure we got everything. We sprinted out of the tent as the fire spread. Tiki grabbed a water jug and dumped it on the flames while I stomped out anything that had caught fire. We eventually got it under control, but half the tent was ruined. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area, but there was no one. Tiki started packing, and I quickly followed suit. We speedwalked in what we hoped was the direction of the truck. There were no landmarks, and it was dark, so we were practically guessing. After about 10 minutes of walking, I heard it again, that same distant scream we'd heard the first 2 nights. Only this time, it didn't stop. It kept going, like an animal in constant pain. Then another scream started from somewhere else, and then another. They were all coming from behind us, and it was clear there were multiple things out there. I didn't say anything, I just grabbed Tiki's arm and moved faster. By some miracle, we found the truck. We threw our stuff in, and I drove off as fast as I could. The road was rough, and without light besides my high beams, every dip felt like it could flip us. After what felt like forever, we hit a main road. I didn't stop speeding until I saw other cars. Tiki was holding it together, but I could tell she wanted to cry, and I wasn't doing a great job of consoling her. We called the police to report everything. All I can think about is how if I weren't such a light sleeper, my girlfriend and I could have been murdered that night in the middle of the desert. This story needs some background. I've always been a little suspicious of my mom's past. She was born in Mexico and spent her childhood there before moving to the States alone for college. The rest is history. She found work, met my dad, and has lived in America ever since. I don't know much about her life before America, and part of me thinks that's intentional. She completely avoids talking about it, deflecting any questions with a joke or by changing the subject. My dad always said it was due to some childhood trauma best left unspoken, and I believed him for a long time. But as I got older, I became more curious, amazed at her skill in dodging those questions at family gatherings. Here's what I do know: she lived in a border town in northern Mexico, along the Texas border, a town not known for its stellar reputation. The closest I've ever gotten to knowing about her parents is a joke she told when I was younger. She'd laugh that her dad's side were the politicians and her mom's side were the crooks, but she could never tell which was which. I initially thought it was just a cynical political joke, but as I got older, I wondered if there was more truth to it. Her dad worked for the government in some capacity, and she never once spoke about her mother. The only other piece of information I have is a name. I'll just call him R. One night when I was around 10 or 11, I woke up to use the bathroom. Walking past our living room, I heard my mom speaking quietly. I didn't understand Spanish, but she repeated R's name multiple times, like she was talking about him, not to him. All the lights were off, so I couldn't see her, but I could hear her. Young me was a little scared of the dark, so I instinctively flipped the light switch. She didn't scream or react, it was like she expected me. She immediately hung up the phone and glared at me with a look I'd never seen. She told me to go back to bed, and I did. That's it. That's basically all I know about my mother's past: a joke, her dad's vague job, and the name R. What I'm about to tell you happened almost a year ago. I'm from Arizona and was driving through the desert on my way to meet an old college friend. It was a really long drive, and I was tired of music. I'm not a podcast guy, so I was cycling through my contacts, calling friends. Eventually, I called my mom. We're both big soccer fans, so we were talking about upcoming Champions League matches. We could talk soccer forever. Suddenly, I saw two pickup trucks blocking the road ahead. It didn't look like an accident. I was worried someone needed help, so I slowed down. My mom was still on the phone, but I hadn't told her what was happening. I stopped my car, wondering if I should get out. Before I could do anything, 3 men sprang out from the trucks, all holding guns. I froze. Another car was quickly approaching from behind. I was unarmed, so compliance was my only choice. One man tapped his gun on my door, motioning for me to get out. The other 2 stood back. I put my hands up and slowly got out. The car behind me had caught up and parked a little ways off. The man barked commands in Spanish, but I didn't understand. My inability to speak Spanish, especially as a Mexican American, is one of my biggest regrets, and in that moment, not being able to communicate with my assailants, I just wanted to die. But it didn't take a translator to know what they wanted. Before I knew it, my phone, keys, wallet, and other personal belongings were in their possession. It looked like I was stranded in a barren desert with no. One of the men got into my truck, and that's when things took a turn. I realized I hadn't hung up with my mom, and since my truck was still running, she was still on the line. I watched through my driver's side window as the man reached his finger toward the screen, as if to hang up, only to pull it back like he changed his mind. I kept watching, and it seemed like he was listening. I instantly connected the dots. My mom must have been speaking to him. Eventually, I saw his lips moving, and realized they were having a full conversation. I couldn't hear anything with the windows closed, but I knew they were speaking Spanish. I swear, I'm 90% sure he repeated ours name a few times, as if my mom had said it and he was confirming. At some point, the other guys must have realized what was going on because they stopped guarding me and approached the car. The guy inside rolled down the window and stared at me as he spoke to the other two. After he finished, all three of them turned and stared at me, sizing me up. The conversation didn't last much longer. They hung up the phone and walked back over to me. They handed me all my stuff back, including my car keys. The only thing they took was the cash in my wallet. One of the men looked at me, smiled, and in a thick accent, said, "Tax," as he did it. I had never been happier to lose all my cash. As I drove away, all three cars, including the one that had been behind me, started speeding off into the desert, away from the road. My plan was to memorize their license plates, but none of the cars had any. I was still in shock. After a few minutes of driving, I called my mother back and demanded an explanation. She told me she had simply threatened to call the police, claiming she was tracking my location and knew exactly where I was. I told her that was obviously BS and insisted she tell me what they'd really talked about. She was adamant about her story, saying most of the Spanish was just her pleading her case. Even though I didn't believe her, there was nothing I could do but accept it. I asked her to call the police for me, and she said she would. We eventually ended the call, and I drove the rest of the way in complete silence. Honestly, I blocked that experience out of my mind for as long as I could. But over time, I couldn't anymore. I'm